Welcome back to another episode of In the Gym. I'm your host, Michael Petrella. I have a very special guest today, IFBB Hall of Famer, Mr. America, Mr. World, Mr. Universe, Mr. Boyer Co. Also, he worked for Nautilus, he worked for Flex Fitness, he had an ownership in Body Masters. I could do a whole episode on just the intro of everything he's accomplished. We're very happy to have him on the show. Boyer, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Michael. It's a real pleasure for you having me here. Thank you.
I want to talk about the very earliest days. How did you get into resistance training in the first place?
Well, I know this is going to sound crazy, Michael, but from the earliest age, I was always interested in being big and strong. I can remember as early as 5 years old, I would go to the newsstand. I wasn't able to read because I hadn't gone to school yet. In those days, you had no kindergarten. You just went into the first grade. So I wasn't able to read, but I would look. And I admired the bodybuilding magazines. I remember, if I remember correctly, the first bodybuilding magazine I ever saw was Tomorrow's Man. And I didn't have any concept of how you got big and strong, but I admired that look. So that was my first introduction, if you will, into weight training. And I was always trying to run faster than other kids in the neighborhood, or we would do chin-ups on the clothesline poles. In those days, people didn't have dryers. You had to hang your clothes out on a clothesline. So as a result, they put poles in the backyard. We try and see who could chin the most. I was always very competitive as a little kid.
That's fantastic. That's probably one of the most unique answers I've gotten from people I've asked this to. So you've been in the fitness industry as a businessman for a long time as well. What was your first main job in the fitness world?
Well, the first gym that opened up, or health club, or health studio, as you would call it in those days, was Ray Roy's Health Club. He was a younger brother of famous Alvin Roy, which is another whole big story. He was Alvin Roy, and I don't want to get off the subject, he was the first weight training coach for LSU. LSU was the first weight training college football team in the country. And as a result of that, they just won state championship or national championship after another because they had the edge on everybody else. They were so much bigger and stronger. But anyway, Ray Roy opened up a health club. And my first little job, I worked out there, but he would allow me to clean up in the back. So that was my first experience in trying to learn a little bit about the health club business. But I was so enthusiastic about the health club. In those days, you had separate hours for men and women. Women would come in the morning until noon, and then men were allowed to come in from noon to 7. I'd have my mother drop me off at noon, and I'd stay there till 7 o'clock at night. I'd work out, and I didn't talk very much. People thought there was something wrong with me, but actually, I was like a sponge. I just wanted to absorb every bit of knowledge I could from people that were working out. In those days, you didn't really have books you could read about weight training. It was just all trial and error. So if I saw a well-built guy, I would eyeball him, see what he was doing, and trying to mimic what he did, and hopefully that would give me results. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Was there a lot of women in the gym in those early days?
Well, I don't remember because the women weren't allowed to. I would only see them in passing, and as a 13, 14-year-old kid, hell, all I wanted was big muscles. I wasn't really interested in how many women had. And I don't think they really did anything. They had those vibrator belts. I think women would come in and do that. Nobody knew anything, especially women didn't know anything about weight training in those days.
Right. And those belts there, they actually still cost a few bucks, and people put them in their gyms. And I've even seen them in like fitness museums and that kind of stuff. And obviously they're completely useless, but they're a fun throwback to that time. Now, early on in your weightlifting, you were competing. I mean, you were a very young man when you were competing. Tell me about your first show and what that experience was like.
Okay, I could write a book on that. By that time I was reading the different bodybuilding magazines, but I'd never seen a contest. I didn't know what to expect. So I read that they had a Teenage Mr. South contest in Birmingham, Alabama. I was 15 at the time. It was in the summer. I told my dad, I said, man, look, I got to go. I want to try and compete in this. I didn't even have, I didn't know what posing trunks were. So I had a swimsuit and I rolled it up so it would be a little bit smaller. And as a result, I entered the contest, 15, had no idea how to pose, nothing. But I went out, I was going to try and do my best. So as a result, I remember they had a young man from New Orleans, Gable Boudreaux. Well, it was supposed to be a teenage contest. He was actually 21, but nobody checked their IDs. So I mean, he won the contest. He was very, very good. And I think I may have placed 5th, not even knowing what the hell I was doing. Now, I guess the second contest, or maybe actually the first contest I was somewhat prepared for, was the Mr. Louisiana contest. I entered that when I was 17, but I only got a week's notice that I had no time to prepare for it. The guy says, hey, next weekend is the Mr. Louisiana contest. So my dad took off, we went to New Orleans. And as it turned out, it was in the wintertime, it was in January. So naturally I had a bad cold, felt terrible, but I wanted to go. I was hell-bent on going. So, you know, I'm just trying to do what everybody else is doing. So we're in the warm-up room, getting ready for the night show. And I'm busy pumping up, not paying attention to where everybody else is at. All of a sudden I realize I'm the only one in the room. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm missing the show. So I run out the door, okay? Didn't know where I was going. The door slammed shut. Now I find myself in an alley behind the YMCA. You know, this is January, about 11 o'clock at night, freezing cold. All I got on was a pair of posing trunks. Now my heart is beating so fast. I said, oh God, I'm beating on the door. Nobody opens the door. Everybody's already gone out to the front where the audience is at. So the only thing I could think to do, I run all the way down the alley, around the corner, go around the block, and come in through the entrance. Just so happens, I get through the entrance, they call my name. Okay, so I got to go through the entrance, get up on stage. Now, I mean, I'm all nervous or wrecked, but somehow or another I held it together. Long story short, I ended up winning. I came out 3rd place, and I think I won the most muscular. So on the way back, we're driving back from New Orleans to Lake Charles. My dad says, you know, son, he said, that was pretty clever, the way you entered the contest. He said, that made the audience really notice you stand out. I didn't have the nerve to ever tell him. Hell, it was only because I got locked out of the door. I had to run all the way around the block. He never knew that.
Boy, that's an unbelievable story. That's absolutely fantastic. We got to go to break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Boyer a little bit more about the longevity of his bodybuilding career and the different physiques he brought to the stage over the years. Welcome back to In the Gym. We're talking with IFBB Hall of Famer Boyer Coe. Now, Boyer, one of the things that I really find fascinating about your bodybuilding career is you almost had different stages. And what I mean by that, when you came out as a very young man, you had all of the proportions. Everyone knew that you were going to be a successful bodybuilder. And then when we kind of get into the 80s, you're very polished, you're very professional. I believe you had 4 big wins in the IFBB in 1981. And then going into the 90s, you come in with probably your biggest and hardest physique yet. This is several decades of competing. I'm curious, in your mind, what was the best package that you brought to the stage?
Well, it's very interesting. A lot of people, I know Randy Rocha says, oh, you absolutely looked your best back in 69, you know, when I first won the Mr. America and the Mr. Universe. I like to think the best look, or the one that I like the best, was in 1994 when I competed in the Masters Mr. Olympia. I was 48 at the time, and I'd always continued to train because I love to train. Okay, even today at 74, I still get up, train every morning at 5 o'clock. But it was interesting that over the time period, I think I brought the best because I was certainly the biggest in 94. I weighed 228. And then a lot has to be said for experience. You develop more stage presence over the years, and you work harder, and you know your weak points, you try to improve it. So I would have to say, at least from my perspective, 94 was the best year that I had. And a lot of people said, okay, 94, but then, like you said, in 81, I had a lot of success. You know, just sometimes you hit and miss. You can try and do everything right, and yet your body's got a mind of its own. Because, for example, I looked good in 81, but I had trained so hard and worked so hard in 82, my body just didn't respond anymore. I was shot. And that's in 82, that's why I said, okay, I just can't compete anymore. So 83, I didn't even enter a contest. I thought I was done with it.
Oh, that's very interesting. So after all these years of training, what are some of the things that you've learned in your personal experience, and how has your training changed? Do you train the same ways you did 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Is there certain themes that have carried over, or has a lot changed for you?
Well, some things have changed, some things have not. I've always been a big proponent in full range of motion, full extension, full contraction. I believe that's important. I don't believe these little half reps that guys do today. Because also by doing full extension, full contraction, it's helped me to remain very flexible. And I always thought that was important as well. Now, over the years, I've adjusted my training. For example, when I was training in 94, I took much of what Dorian Yates was expressing in his training, you know, high intensity training. But I think, and even he would agree, that you just can't jump in and do a heavy set. People say, like Arthur used to say, oh, you just do a set to failure. If you're going to do a set to failure, you got to be at least warmed up a little bit, or you're going to hurt something. So I would always do maybe 2, sometimes even 3 warm-up sets before I would go to an all-out heavy set. And we got extremely strong doing that. I remember we would do, for example, a leg extension. We were doing a set to failure with about 350 pounds on a leg extension to failure, and then follow that up with, say, 4 or 5 negatives after that. But you had to warm up before you try and do something that heavy.
So when Boyer talks about negatives, what he's referring to is someone lifting the resistance to him and then continuing to lower it. He's gone past the point of positive failure where he cannot lift the resistance anymore. It's a very, very hard way of training. I got another question for you about training though, Boyer. So if you were to get somebody brand new coming into the gym, obviously you have a lifetime of knowledge. What would be some of the things that you would try to get them to learn and to accomplish in the early days of their training?
Well, the important thing is not so much the weight, but the correct form in doing exercise. I see so many guys when I go to, for example, LA Fitness. That's the biggest problem, that they're very excited about signing up a membership, but then they just turn the people loose. Many people don't have a clue as to what they're doing. And I mean, I would spend, if I wanted to, I'd spend all day in the gym just trying to show people the finer points of how to get the most out of the exercise rather than just slamming the weights around. I always believe that people use entirely too much momentum in doing an exercise.
So really feeling the resistance, still training intensely, but feeling what they're doing and not just swinging it around and letting that muscle do the work.
Correct.
Have you seen any really bad injuries in the gym, or did you ever take any in your training career?
Well, the thing is this, I mean, you always, when you train very heavy, back in my competitive days, especially in my early days, because as I said, everything was trial and error. I didn't have a coach telling me, oh, do this or do that. You know, you kind of had to watch people, but I remember hurting my lower back doing heavy deadlifts. Because see, back in those days when you competed, it was only AAU competition. That's all they had in the South. So bodybuilding competitions didn't even start until after the weightlifting or powerlifting was over with. So to pass the time, because sometimes the bodybuilding contest wouldn't get started until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So to pass the time, I started competing in a powerlifting contest. And I remember really hurting my back a couple of times bad doing deadlifts. I just don't think had the right form, or maybe I wasn't built to do heavy deadlifts. I was strong on the squat and strong on the bench press. But that was my main thing. When I first started, my goal was to be able to bench press 400 pounds before I got out of high school. And I got in so much trouble because I was so motivated. I would carve 400 into every desk I sat in school to remind me that, that's what my goal was. So by the time I got out of high school, I dare say most of the desks had 400 carved in it somewhere, but I managed just to get in doing that. And that was my goal. So I was big into powerlifting until they finally did away with it, and then started holding bodybuilding contests separately.
Yet another great story. Thank you for sharing that, Boyer. We're going to go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Boyer a little bit about the current bodybuilding world, some of the things that are going on with the athletes and some of the things that are going on with the business. Welcome back to the show. We're talking today with Mr. Universe Boyer Coe. Boyer, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the current state of the bodybuilding community, the actual athletes themselves, maybe the gym business as well. What does it look like today, and where do you think it might be going in the future?
Well, it's changed so much when I was competing, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't gone to a bodybuilding competition, say for example, a Mr. Olympia, in probably the last 25 or 30 years. So I do know this, the guys are making really good money. I mean, if you win the Mr. Olympia today, you're looking at winning $400,000 prize money. Not a bad, basically, we did all the same things they did, except we did it for free, but because for the love of the sport. But I don't really know, actually, to be honest with you, the way that COVID has hit, I don't even know if they'll even be able to have a Mr. Olympia. I do know this, all the competitors from Europe, which there are many excellent competitors, they won't be able to compete in the Mr. Olympia because they're not allowed because of the quarantine. They can't even come over and compete in the contest. So I don't really know how that's all going to play out this year. Originally, the Mr. Olympia was always held in September. Now they've moved it to end of December, and it's still kind of doubtful if it'll take place.
How do you think this might play with some of the preparation of the athletes? As you would know as good as anybody, you're dialing in for a show. You've decided so many weeks in advance you're going to diet, so many weeks in advance you're going to train a certain way. And for some of these athletes, they only might do 1 or 2 big shows a year, and this is going to change their entire schedule. How do you think they're going to react to that?
See, that's the thing. First thing you have to remember, you take, for example, let's just never mind the European competitors, because actually there's some people over not only in Europe but in the Middle East that are training for the contest. I don't know what the situation is with the gyms there, but you take, for example, here in the United States, basically all the gyms are closed. So I don't know how the competitors are training for the contest. I would imagine either they're able to sneak into the gym or they got their own private setup. Otherwise, I don't see how they can get ready for a contest.
We're only just starting to see the fallout from COVID in terms of the business. Up here in Ontario, Canada, we have seen some of the big box facilities close down. You're obviously in California. What are you seeing around your area and in the U.S.? Is it really dire straits, or are some of these businesses finding ways to adapt?
I think you're correct at first, is in dire straits. 24-Hour Fitness has already declared bankruptcy. Gold's Gyms has declared bankruptcy. Now, they may come out of it. That's not saying they're going to go out of business. LA Fitness is still in business, but everything is closed. I don't see how they can continue through the end of the year and remain closed. It's just too much overhead going out and no revenue coming in. But now, that's here in California. Maybe in other states it's a little bit different. They've always held the New York Pro. Years ago, it used to be called a Night of Champions. Well, the New York Pro is being held this year, but this time it's in Tampa, Florida. So
Are they still calling it the New York Pro?
and they're still calling it the New York Pro, but it's, as a matter of fact, I talked to Sean Ray yesterday. He's one of the MCs. He says, while actually leaving today, he says, I'm going down to Tampa. I said, what for? He says, well, I'm MCing the New York Pro show. I said, but it's in Tampa. He said, yeah, but they're still calling it the New York Pro. Crazy.
That's funny stuff. The other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, Blair, is what personal projects are you working on right now? I mean, you've been in every facet of the fitness industry. You've been a competitive bodybuilder. You've worked for equipment companies. You've worked at different gyms. What projects is Boyer Costa working on today?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to work with what I consider the brightest mind in the fitness industry, and that's Mark Nally. He owned Flex Equipment for many years. He founded that. He sold out. And let me back up a little bit. When I was with Body Masters, he was with Flex. We were always competing against one another. He admired what we were trying to do. I admired his innovation. He was essentially the best one-off guy ever. And right now, I can show you a little bit of what we're doing. We have patents on all of this stuff. This is the first one. Unfortunately, we're missing the buying season for Christmas. It's coming up, but it will be available in January. I hope you can see this. Can you see that clearly?
Yep.
Okay, that's a selectorized dumbbell. Rather than having a whole rack of dumbbells, this particular dumbbell will go from as light as 5 pounds to as much as 80 pounds. Okay, but never growing in length. You just flip the switches to change the resistance. Okay, now we've also come out with what we call a triple threat, which will be a barbell, dumbbells, and a kettlebell. And then that's a second patent. The third patent is what we're working on now, is we call flex drive. And even with this, I'm not real proficient in explaining it. But what we've actually done is created a tiny sensor, a motor in each plate, which will give feedback not only to the clubs, but let's say you're a private trainer and you're in Canada, but your client is in California, or it could be over in Germany. You'll be able to track that person. He can't tell you, oh, well, I did 10 reps on this. You'll be able to actually see what he did. You'll be able to measure his range of motion, and even it will give you a grade on his performance after every set. And electronically, it'll change the dumbbell. Let's say you start off, you have a lady training, and her first set is with 5 pounds. As soon as she sets the dumbbell back in the cradle, and the second set is 10 pounds, it'll automatically lock on 10 pounds for her next set. Maybe the next set is 20 pounds. It automatically manages all of that, and it'll also give feedback to the clubs how much that machine, in essence, in the selectorized machines, how much it'll be used in a club. So they can say, oh, this machine needs to be taken down and serviced, or it's not getting used. Let's take it out, put something in that's more popular.
That is very cool technology, and I can't wait to see it in use. Boyer, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming on. If anyone needed to get in touch with you, or we want to know more about this technology you're talking about, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Well, unfortunately, my second business, I only operate off of one email, is we insure classic and exotic cars. Of course, that is a standstill right now as well, because we are unable to go to car shows. So you really can't generate a lot of new customers. But that email address is info@richardsonclassic.com if they want to contact me that way.
Perfect. Thank you again for coming on the show today, Boyer.
Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Michael.